That's not true anymore. We're so used to it now. We hear it constantly. On Wednesday, 2 days ago, during a closed-door briefing in Congress on Russia, Jim Cooper of Tennessee, a Democrat, asked an intelligence briefer to find out if this show is tied to Russia. We're not tied to Russia, of course. It's a cable television program. We're not a diplomatic mission. Jim Cooper, needless to say, knows that. But that's not the point. The point is we've criticized the Biden administration's Ukraine policy. So in retaliation for that, Jim Cooper has asked the intel agencies to dig up dirt on us. To be clear, that's not allowed. It's illegal. It is illegal to use the U.S. government to settle partisan scores or to silence opposition journalists. It is also, by the way, illegal to secretly monitor their electronic communications. But Joe Biden's NSA did that to this show this summer. That happened. We're not speculating about it. The NSA admitted it. And Congressman Cooper admitted what he did today when we asked him, though he was too cowardly to come on the show tonight to explain how he could justify that. This is scary behavior. It's also revealing. After a full year of governing, all the Biden administration can muster when challenged are ad hominem attacks and more spying from the intel agencies. Let's put the intel agencies on them. What they can't do is explain themselves. They don't even try. That's not a sign of strength. It's a sign of rot. It's a sign of weakness. And yet they're doing it and they're getting away with it. How are they getting away with it? Very simple. They're getting away with it because Republicans are allowing them to get away with it. Screaming about Russia, even as we ignore China, is now a bipartisan effort. You remember Russiagate? You thought Republicans would never fall for that again? No, they internalized the whole thing. They now believe that Russia is our greatest enemy. They're the existential threat. All eyes on Putin. They could stop this tomorrow. If Mitch McConnell criticized the buildup to war with Putin, it would end immediately. If 5 Republicans in the United States Senate held a press conference tomorrow to declare that the territorial integrity of the United States is more important than the territorial integrity of Ukraine, this couldn't continue. The lunacy would end. But they're not doing that. Instead, Republicans are every bit as hysterical about Russia as Adam Schiff ever was. Watch.
So we do need to go ahead and impose sanctions on Russia now. We need to show them that we mean business and we will be there for Ukraine.
Do you think President Joe Biden should send U.S. troops to Eastern Europe?
Without delay.
It appears to me the administration is moving in the right direction.
There needs to be clear consequences for what they do, because we failed to deter, and now you're inviting conflict. It's a very bad situation, and we've left ourselves without many options as a result.
I don't think we're providing the deterrence necessary to stop Putin from invading Ukraine.
As Putin tries to dismantle NATO and divide NATO, I support President Biden's decision to send more troops in to reinforce NATO.
So Lindsey Graham just admits that I'm on Biden's side, but most of them are too clever to do that. They are doing something that you may not notice at first. They're attacking Joe Biden for being weak. His weakness is inviting aggression. And on the basis of that, they are in fact agreeing with Biden and supporting his Russia policy. Got that? We're against Biden. That's why we're backing him up in his Russia policy. Pretty clever. Is that what Republican voters want? Let's see. If you ask them, they'd probably say, well, why don't we send as much military equipment to the Texas border as we've sent to the Russian border? If someone said that out loud, then maybe the entire country could assess how grotesque Washington's priorities are. Speaking of grotesque priorities, Senator John Cornyn represents Texas, has for a long time. Texas is a state that's had well over 1 million foreign nationals pour into it illegally over the last year, right over the border. That's a far bigger invasion than anything Vladimir Putin is planning in Ukraine. And yet when John Cornyn talks about border security, he's not talking about his own state or even his own country. He's talking about Ukrainian border security. Watch.
Make no mistake, an attack on Ukraine is also an attack on America's global security interests and on world peace, and could have cascading consequences that right now are too horrible to contemplate. This is an existential threat to our leadership in the world and to the global order we underwrite, and to our way of life and the way of life of freedom-loving democracies around the world.
Freedom-loving democracies around the world. Now, these are people who sit in committee meetings, often with closed doors. What are they doing? Well, they're apparently sicking the intel agencies and anyone who criticizes them. But are they getting unfiltered information from those intel agencies? Are they making wise decisions on the basis of it? Do they have any idea what they're talking about, including the man you just saw? No, of course not. They cloak their ignorance in the usual cliches, freedom-loving democracies like Ukraine. But the truth is, their interests, their beliefs are so far out of alignment with the interests and beliefs of the average person in this country, including their own voters, that once that is exposed to light, they're in trouble. Last point, this is only happening because there is no credible opposition to it in the Congress. Aaron Mate has watched this happen for a long time. He's an independent journalist. He's on Substack. He also hosts Pushback with Aaron Mate on the Gray Zone. He's reported extensively on the State Department lying us into this conflict or that over the years, and we're happy to have him join us now. Aaron Mate, thanks so much for coming on. Look, I said at the outset, totally heartfelt. I have no idea if Vladimir Putin is planting some kind of false flag with Russian actors disguised as Ukrainian intel operatives or whatever. But I'm just wondering, as Matt Lee did in that briefing, is there any evidence that that's true?
Well, none that we've seen, but the problem is there's been this entrenched playbook in this country where people like Matt Lee in media are a rarity, where he just did his basic job as a journalist, where the government makes a claim, a very consequential one about a foreign power, and instead of writing it down like a court stenographer, he asked for evidence. And you saw what Ned Price did in response. He just said, trust us, and when that didn't work, he accused him of being a Russian dupe. And that's the just entrenched playbook that has been established in this country. In recent memory, the biggest and worst example was the Iraq War, where if you questioned the Bush administration's claims that Iraq had WMDs and was working with al-Qaeda, you were dismissed as a Saddam Hussein apologist. In the case of Phil Donahue of MSNBC, he was simply taken off of the air. And in the last 5+ years, the adversary this time has been Russia, and it's worth thinking about why. I think the reason why this Russiagate disinformation campaign has been so pervasive is because it serves such a wide spectrum of powerful interests. It starts with the Clinton campaign. They came up with this fake Trump-Russia collusion plot, and when they lost the election, instead of doing minimal self-reflection, they decided to blame Russia and try to convince the public that Russia had brainwashed millions of Americans and that Trump and his campaign were in cahoots. We all know how that worked out. It was a complete scam. But members of the national security state and the FBI and the CIA, they embraced that too for their own reasons. They claim that they are concerned with Russia being an autocracy, but they don't care about that. Right now, the U.S. is supporting Saudi Arabia, one of the world's worst dictatorships, in bombing civilians in Yemen. So it wasn't about that. They didn't like the fact that Trump was calling for better relations with Russia. And they didn't like the fact that Trump also was criticizing on the campaign trail. In office, he was much different, but on the campaign trail, he was criticizing foreign interventions like in Syria. And they have an animus towards Russia because Russia is a deterrent to U.S. hegemony. Russia can fight back. It's a nuclear power. It pushed back in Ukraine when the U.S. launched a coup with Joe Biden's heavy involvement, along with Victoria Nuland, who's back in power now under Biden. It countered by taking Crimea. And in Syria, too, the U.S. was on the side of sectarian death squads like al-Qaeda, as Jake Sullivan wrote to Hillary Clinton 10 years ago. He wrote, al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. And Russia took the different side. Russia took the side of the government of Bashar al-Assad, and that side won. So that has fueled this heavy climate of animus towards Russia and Washington. And what it means is that any allegation against Russia, whether it's the Russian bounties in Afghanistan, whether it's Hunter Biden's laptop is Russian disinformation, there's Trump-Russia collusion, anything that is said is accepted on faith and nobody questions it. And if you dare challenge it, you're deemed a Russian apologist.
Well, let me just ask you very quickly about that. So you've been covering this for at least the past 5 years that I've noticed. And I know that you have been denounced many times as a Putin apologist, a Putin toady, as a disloyal American. Obviously, we have been too. Why do people in a briefing room put up with it when a government employee singles out a reporter and calls him a disloyal American? Because that's effectively what Ned Price did. Why doesn't someone say, "Hey, knock it off, pal. We're not going to take that from you. We have no reason to take that from you." Nobody says anything. Why is that okay?
I think because they want to be a part of the club. They see what the party line is, and they want to be a part of the party. Matt Lee is a rarity. He's an actual journalist who takes his job seriously. A lot of other people, unfortunately, would like to be a part of a club, and the club has meant for the last 5 years being a part of a cult called Blue Anon. We know about QAnon. There's a cult called Blue Anon in which Russia is responsible for every single U.S. problem, and if you disagree with that, you're a Russian asset. And unfortunately, too many people want to be a part of that club.
That's exactly right. Air Monte, great to see you tonight. Thank you.